All right. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Accomplices for Justice. I think this is episode 18.
Wow.
Yes. So, episode 18, which in the Jewish tradition is a very special number because in ancient Hebrew, there were no Arabic numerals, there were just letters. So that all the numbers in classical Hebrew are, in fact, from uh, combinations of letters. So letters A through J are the equivalent of 1 through 10. And then JA is 11,
Mm,
only, of course, in Hebrew. So that's Aleph through Yud and Yud Aleph. However, the, the letters for the number 18 are Yud and Chet, which spoken together are Chai. That is the the word for life. So
mm,
18. So Jews often will give donations in denominations of 18 for this reason.
mm.
So 18 is very special. So on top of all that, it is our final meeting before the 2024 election.
Yeah.
We are 6 days to election day here in the United States. So, with
Yes.
all of that, Accomplices for Justice, our mission is to try to figure out how to make it all work better. In other words, how do we turn our conversations that we hope are constructive into constructive actions, collective actions, organizing for justice for all? I'm Rabbi Jonathan Freirich. I am a rabbi here in Buffalo, New York, doing a lot of different things, no longer serving a congregation, but still serving. And I am joined by my accomplice in justice, accomplice for justice, and honored friend and colleague, Reverend Dr. Wylie Hughes, who is the senior pastor at Orchard Park Presbyterian Church. Uh, and today we are taking a look at fearless speech, a book. Uh, well, the topic is prompted by this new book by Mary Anne Franks, Breaking Free from the First Amendment. And uh, if you want to continue supporting our speech, please go to www.opendoorjudaism.org. That's opendoorjudaism.org, and feel free to make a donation, or you can find us at Patreon under Accomplices for Justice. So, in any event, Pastor Hughes,
Yes.
uh, you have a you have any good wise words before I start us down this question of free speech conversation before we start today?
I will start our conversation quoting the words of the great rapper Ice-T, who said about 20, 30 years ago, yes, we have the freedom of speech, but watch what you say.
Amen to that. So, because no greater faith leader than Ice-T for that in that regard,
He was ahead of his time for sure.
in
Yeah,
so many ways.
in so
All
many
right.
ways.
So my opening question, which prompted Pastor Hughes to begin to think, and I interrupted it beforehand because I wanted to hear it live and in person.
Oh, yes, yes.
So, Professor Franks talks about how what she calls reckless speech is protected. That is, the speech of the powerful. And it is often protected at the expense of what she calls fearless speech, or speaking truth to power, or coming out with words that make the powerful uncomfortable. Um, so, today, right now, we have seen that the reckless speech of the powerful, in particular, some public figures, is causing real harm and yet continues to be protected, right? So people have no problem promulgating lies in public and with zero regard for the actual harm being caused.
Mm,
Professor Franks points out that historically, pornographers, stalkers, abusers, Nazis, racists like the Klan receive immense amounts of speech protection, including from the ACLU, while vulnerable women and minorities do not.
mhm.
And when the powerful receive speech protections, they often receive them in situations that are already harming the less powerful or continue to lead to harm for the less powerful. So merely saying that prompted Pastor Hughes to say, huh, I have some questions. So
I do have questions. I do. In fact, I have a critique of that.
please.
I think that, and this is sort of an overall thing. And again, hopefully we'll get deeper into it. But I think that if you ever thought that your speech was free, you are dumb. That's why it's called freedom. So we are not free. All right. Um, and we know this because, like we just said, there are people who can say whatever they want to say with impunity, and then there are people who's silenced and censored pretty much all the time. And so the freedom is not equitable. The freedom is not equal. It shifts. And where does the shift come from? I think it goes back to power, right? Your freedom is protected if you have the power to pay for that protection, or if you have the complexion for that protection.
Uh,
And so we can't say that something is free and then what Frank says is control what that freedom looks like. And it's no longer free. It's no longer free. If we say, well, you can't say that because that's going to hurt marginalized people, then there is no free speech. Even if you're advocating for good speech, positive speech, uplifting speech, you're still not making it free. You're controlling the speech. And so it nullifies the whole point of free speech.
so
Reinterpreting the First Amendment is destroying the First Amendment, right? I'm not saying that it shouldn't happen. I'm just saying, in essence, you're taking away the very freedom that the First Amendment
right, but
protects.
Professor Franks is starting off at the basis that the First Amendment doesn't actually guarantee freedom of speech for anybody. It restricts the government's ability to curtail speech.
Of
Right. So
course.
so
Yeah.
it the First Amendment is not about your and my rights.
Right. It's about the government.
It's about restraint on the government.
Exactly.
So in the past, we had one could say that we were more regularly governed by norms of behavior. So for example, over the last since the Obama administration, one can say that the white supremacist threads of American society began to take the gloves off on what was allowable because as soon as an African American became president, that meant that suddenly this was no longer the province of polite white men. And that meant that they could see themselves as unbound by conventions. And now what we are seeing is when those who are in power see themselves as unbound by conventional norms, suddenly we need restrictions to guide everything as opposed to a basic moral compass. Now, the flip side of that is that the problem with the norms of behavior as interpreted by the white Christians in power is they often said that anybody who didn't look like them, who wasn't from the background that they had, couldn't possibly behave in according to those norms, that some of those norms included who got to participate at all. So there's the problem with any sort of rule of thumb is sometimes that thumb is helping us out, right? It extended as a hand, and sometimes it's a thumb on the scale.
Mm.
And so here, what Professor Franks is really saying is absolutely what you're saying as well, that power has always dictated what speech is allowed.
Yeah.
Power has always dictated who is free to do what. So she is asking for not for a reinterpretation of the First Amendment for the sake of those who are outside of power, as opposed to for
But
the sake of those who are in power.
you can't do that.
What do you mean?
You can't do that. You can't, because what you're doing, you're not solving the problem. You're just swinging the pendulum in the opposite direction. Okay. If the rich and powerful are able to control our speech, now you're saying, okay, they shouldn't be able to control our speech. Then who's going to do the controlling? Who's going to say who gets to say what? Now you're just shifting power. So, she advocates for fearless speech, which is speech that yes, it challenges, but it also empowers, which I think is a noble thing. but I think it comes at the expense of power. So who are we going to put in power to make that possible? Who are we going to say who gets to decide that? And that's the
So
question.
that is the question, and I think what so she lays out a distinction between what I think is a pretty reasonable understanding of what speech should be free and what speech should not be, which is the question of harm.
Hmm.
And I think measuring harm is something that we could in fact empower courts, for example, to do. We could we because it's about damage.
Yes, it is about damage, but I'm hearkening back to the First Amendment, which really focused more so on published work. It was more geared toward print. What you put in print, freedom of speech, according to the founders, was freedom to, yeah, it was, I mean, yeah, speech itself, but speech that was publicated, stuff that you can write. You know, because before that, you know, you couldn't say anything against the king. You couldn't write an article against the king. You couldn't voice your own opinions. And the freedom of speech, and it went hand in hand with the freedom of press. So we're talking about this a document that cannot control what comes out of a person's mouth, but it can definitely control what is printed, what is publicated, what is released, right? Because you can't control what somebody said. You know, you can't stop someone from speaking their truth. I hate to say it like that because that's so ridiculous, but
Sure,
you
we
can.
can.
Well, yeah, let's say it. You can't stop a person from
So
speaking their
so
truth.
if my truth is getting out there on a street corner and gathering everyone together and saying, um, I am gathering us all together because I believe very strongly that we need to go out and kill this person. That is not acceptable speech.
That is not acceptable speech
Right.
in
So
certain circles.
no, in according to you know First Amendment law for
Yeah,
quite some
but
time.
that is exactly what happened up until 19 what 64. You know,
Well,
white people were
so
gathering posses and lynching black people for 50 years, and no, the government had no problem with it. So again, we come back to this idea of who's in power, right?
right, because again, the issue was something marginally objective, which is harm,
Right.
as opposed to the entirely subjective understanding of the First Amendment up until, and this is really where I think Professor Franks offers us something of substance.
Okay.
The communal norms about obscenity and what is
Mm-hmm.
offensive and all that sort of thing has always been in the eye of the most powerful beholder,
Mm-hmm. Right.
right? And again, she points out that generally speaking, the white the minimum white man in free speech legal circles in the tradition of First Amendment cases is a fragile person,
Yeah.
right? Easily offended by the
Easily
most.
offended. Yes. Eggshells.
Right?
Snowflakes.
Yes, and that is a moving target, right? She
Yeah.
focuses on this Minnesota law um, from the 1980s that was struck down by the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court rejected the harm argument.
Yeah.
They accepted that pornography actually harmed women
Mm-hmm.
and then said, but we still have to allow it. And
Yeah.
I think, the legal framework for damages and harm is very rich, right? In
Yes.
both in civil and criminal law. And
I agree.
I think this is a much better way to go. We are still going to be stuck in our system of might makes right because
Mm-hmm.
because you and I together can hire a better lawyer than somebody else, or somebody else can
Mm-hmm.
hire a better lawyer than you and I can.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
that um, these inequities are still part of our society, right? We haven't figured out a way to have the real wronged person in a situation be able to have the best lawyer to take their case to the Supreme Court. nor have we figured out a situation whereby the Supreme Court can be not, in fact, dominated by corporate Christian fascist interests.
But that also, you know, it overlaps with the conversation of definition. I mean, you can define harm as anything these days. I mean, let's look at. I mean, she talks about the Me Too movement. She talks about this online harassment. That's all a matter of perspective. I mean, it's all a matter of perspective, right? And people are
Well,
manipulating it and using it. It's all about, okay, is it really harm? Is it, nah, you're not really hurt, you're okay? Like cyberbullying as opposed to physical bullying. It gets into the weeds here.
okay. So I think it's possible to distinguish this because I have faith in in the deliberation of a legal system in theory. That is to say,
In theory.
well,
Yeah, I
that
hear what
is
you're
to
saying. I
that
hear
is
what you're
to
saying.
say that the cyberbullying that leads a kid to attempt suicide is real harm,
Mm.
right? Versus the discomfort that a student feels in a classroom reading Huck Finn.
Yes, that's my point exactly. How why are these
Right. So Barb
things?
asks, free speech that harms is different from free speech that is threatening, is it not? Oh, Barb, this is a big issue. What
Yeah,
about the stalker?
because to
Right?
me, I think it's all free speech. Either it's free
Well,
or it's
whoa, whoa,
not.
whoa, whoa, wait, 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 wait.
you
Professor
know?
Franks goes does this deep dive on a stalker who causes
Yeah.
real harm to a person, whose behavior causes a person to curtail their behavior, whose behavior causes a person real anxiety and difficulty, impedes this person's ability to go out in public as a performer, and impedes this person's
Yes.
ability to participate in society because of the
Mm,
stalker's behavior. And the Supreme Court said no.
yeah.
If the stalker thinks their communications are innocent and their intent is good, then we trust the stalker more than we trust the victim.
That's my point. My point is it's too it's okay. You think it's possible, I say it's not possible. We
Well,
cannot we cannot police we cannot police everybody. We can't. Now, we're trying to take
so no,
everything
but
case
this is
by
not about
case.
policing everybody. This is about giving everyone the right to make their claim.
This, yes, but at the same time, we're saying that free speech that harms is different from free speech that is threatening. So if there are differences, then how do we determine which is what?
Oh no, no, because threatening sometimes is threatening harm,
I
right?
understand, but
So
but
there's a difference
again,
between me feeling threatened and the threat actually changing my behavior.
I understand, but my point is, how do we get to that reality without policing? How do we determine who determines what is really harm and what is really threatening? Who determines whether, okay, this person was cyberbullied, but they didn't hurt themselves, they didn't hurt anybody else, so it's all good. Who determines that though? That's where I have the problem. Because
So
I,
what? So
I I
what?
hear
So
what you're
okay,
saying.
okay. So what's the flip side, Pastor Hughes? If we don't do any of this, how do we cope with what has become an uncivic society?
Well, oh my God. Considering the mood that I'm in today, Rabbi, I'm afraid to say it because this will be recorded for all of history. Don't want to go down as such a Debbie Downer. So let me try to say it differently. I don't. I can't say it. I can't say it any differently. I Either we have free speech or speech is just not free. I do not trust the government to work on behalf of everyone equally. I just don't trust the government to do it. I don't trust the legal system to go and get into the intricate. I just don't trust them because I come from a tradition. I am a descendant of people where the government and the law has failed us for generations. And I just don't trust the government or the law to do what's right. I do not think of our country as a moral country. And so I we're letting the fox into the hen house whenever we come up with these sorts of scenarios. We are letting the very people who threaten us the most into these conversations about what's free and what's not free. And they're not going to work for everyone's well being. That's just,
A
I
hundred
mean,
percent. And I accept as axiomatic, as the very premise of American society, your observation in this,
mm,
right? Um, so how, therefore, do we make our way forward, right? For example, we have the residents of Springfield, Ohio,
hmm
who have been objectively harmed by
yes.
public lies.
Yeah.
I personally have been objectively harmed. My entire career, my family upended by someone else's exercise of their free speech
hmm
with zero recourse. Uh, we and I am much better situated than the Haitian immigrants in Springfield to survive it.
hmm
Uh, so, what do we do? I mean, Professor Franks offers some potential solutions.
hmm
Um, you know, she talks about prioritizing the teaching of the First Amendment in public schools. She talks about uh, doing a much better job controlling public spaces, putting the
Right.
burden on our our social media
Exactly. Right.
to be responsible about the spaces they create.
That's right. And we see how far that's gotten us.
Well,
Because
we
who
haven't.
control well, who controls the media? Oh, well, who controls the media though? Who controls the media? And this is okay. It's not a critique against what she's saying. It's just that who she's advocating for. You know, she's leaving it up to the social media to determine those things, and the social media cannot and will not. There's too
Oh
much
no,
money
she's not
involved.
leaving it up to it. She's actually asking. She's actually calling for greater regulation of social media.
Right, but what I'm saying is, in so doing, it's not. I just don't think it's going to happen because there's too much money to be made, and those that the powers that she's appealing to curtail this situation are not going to. They're not going to acquiesce to that.
They're all too beholden, is what you're
They're
saying.
all too beholden. They're all in bed together, and so I mean,
Down to Jeff Bezos
oh yeah,
squashing the Washington Post's
oh
editorial
yeah.
page.
Oh yeah, and down to Elon Musk contributing to Donald Trump's campaign because he wants to take control of the media. The same people that have been attacking former Twitter and all these other sort of social media outlets, he wants control of that, right? And so even now we're seeing media is being sold out if it hadn't already been sold out, which I think it has. But now it's starting to be uncovered that everything is for sale. Everything is for sale.
So what what if anything can we do about that?
We can unplug.
All right, so 200,000 people
We can
and
unplug.
200,000 plus people have canceled their subscriptions to the Washington Post in the days following uh, Jeff Bezos' interference with
Yeah,
the Washington Post editorial board. The
yeah,
significant many of the leaders at the Washington Post, including many journalists, have left the Post in
yeah.
protest. Uh,
That's one way to do it.
so when it comes to figuring out truth in the public sphere, we as the public need to do a better job of demanding it.
I completely agree with that. I think we have an obligation, and this is why I say this because there we you and me, accomplices for justice, and all of our followers and people who are watching and listening, we can't attack that Goliath. Yes, we're David and we have stones, but that's a whole different thing. But what we can do is what we do with our own selves. We can control ourselves. We can control what we consume. And we can demand as consumers, because sort of consumerism is sort of part and parcel with capitalism, right? So if we all, as the people, say we are no longer going to subscribe to your media outlet unless you do X, Y, and Z, that's really the only power that we have, and I think it's all the power that we need. But by the same stroke, we can't be so sensitive about things. I kind of feel like it's almost like now that criticism is coming to a certain group of people, all of a sudden we have to be careful about what we say on social media when there's been groups of people who have always been subject to these attacks. We're always being subjugated, and so if we've had to deal with it for generations, right? We can go back 60, 70 years in the media and talk about how marginalized people have been portrayed in the media. That's free speech too. And nobody had a problem with it, right? Because that was a social norm. It was a social norm to depict African Americans with big lips, big pink lips, eating watermelons, because that was the propaganda. And nobody had a problem with that. And no one talked about free speech. No one talked about, oh, harm, even though it was very harmful. Nobody talked
Well,
about
no,
how that legacy was manifested when Obama and his wife came into the White House and they likened her into a monkey. Nobody talked about how that has been perpetuated for the past 80 years in the media. That's not harm. But now that middle America is being threatened by cyberbullying and the like, oh, now all of a sudden we have to be concerned about what we say. It's a bit hypocritical.
so however,
Ah, okay. However,
if we can, to a certain extent, we need to build upon the idea that the public square is not a free for all, that we have to be
mm,
responsible in our engagement. And
yes, I agree with you on that. But how do we do that, Jonathan? Because again, you're this goes back to appealing to a person's more sense of morality, right? We're appealing to people. We're talking about people. Social media makes money. It makes a ton of money. And so now you're going to tell these people who are building their careers off of their social media content to say, now let's be more responsible about the content we create. What are they going to say? You going to pay me?
so so we have a century plus of media transformation. We have 2 centuries of attempting to figure out what is okay to put in the press,
True.
right?
That's true. That's true.
You know,
We've come a long way.
we had yellow journalism, we had
Red
tycoons
journalism.
and red journalism,
Yeah.
tycoons in control of uh, the entirety of newspapers,
It's
smearing
true.
people. We had here in New York State, we had legislators who were expelled from the New York State legislature because they were communists, not
Mm-hmm.
because they'd done anything, merely
Right,
because
right.
they
They were
had run on a
associated.
communist ticket,
Yes, yes.
right? So
Mm-hmm.
that was it. So there we have a not a terribly good history of outcomes, but we do have a history of process.
Mm-hmm.
And here's the rub, and it goes back to the Adam Gopnik stuff, right? About whether or not we can engage with the system to improve it,
Or
or
burn it
just
down.
or burn it down or throw it out,
Burn
right?
it down.
Because what
Yeah.
you're saying is stop regulating free speech, because the regulation in and of itself will only be for the sake of the most powerful.
Only. And that's really what I'm saying. I'm saying, you know, as an African American person, I'm on social media. I hear hate speech against other African American people. What am I supposed to do? I keep scrolling. I look at videos of kittens. It's social media. People are idiots, right? People are idiots. People are racist. People are sexist. People are misogynist. They exist, right? And now they're on social media, they have a platform. Okay, but that's what it means to be free. And so just because there's people out there spewing hatred, okay, if the hatred becomes harmful, then there's something that we have to do about it. But at the same time, it's tricky.
So in this way, you're saying even though Heather Heyer was killed by an extremist driving a car in Charlottesville, that the ACLU was on the right side of history in fighting for the organizers of that rally in Charlottesville to have the right to do it,
That's freedom of speech. That's the freedom of speech, man.
or
Yeah, it's
freedom of
I'm not
assembly. But yes,
freedom
so
freedom of assembly. I'm not saying no. I'm not saying that it was right or wrong. I'm saying I guess this is sort of where the ACU is coming from. The ACLU is saying that regardless, that rights need to be protected, and whose rights need to be protected. Now that's a different question. If we're going to talk
So
about protecting
but
rights, because rights are determined, rights are have already been determined. These are our rights. These are our
so
inalienable rights,
should we
right?
demand the ACLU do a better job of protecting Amber Heard, whose free speech was squashed by her abuser
I,
publicly?
I I think it's difficult for us to apply a blanket statement to all situations. That's where we
Right,
get in trouble.
but here are two pretty stark situations, right? The
Yeah.
ACLU fought hard for the Unite the Right rally
Hmm.
in the same way
And
that
why? Okay. And why do they fight hard for it? Let's talk about why do they fight hard for it.
they fought hard for it because they felt that uh, the way the ACLU likes to say this is speech that we find offensive needs to be protected.
I okay. I would say it differently. I would
Okay,
say that they fought for it because the idea of free speech is universal. All right. And if you don't fight for their right to a peaceful assembly, then you shouldn't fight for anybody else's right for a peaceful assembly as well. Because it's
but then
applied across the
on the
board.
flip side, they
It's across the
invited
board.
Amber Heard to write an article
Yeah.
to
To offer
to
her.
no to highlight the how people who are abused are silenced on the one hand, and
Hmm.
then they refused to defend her when she was attacked at their instigation for speaking out, even though she didn't actually name her abuser. And
Hmm.
so she ended up with a $50 million settlement against her that she had to go in and take a plea deal on because she couldn't afford it. Because the ACLU said basically Nazis have the right to speak, and we're going to encourage those who are abused to have the right to speak, but we're going to abandon them in the public sphere when the powerful white male abuser um, feels damaged.
Well, well, you just answered your own question. Um, it's the white male abuser. It's the white male that is the key, the linchpin to all of this stuff, right?
So therefore, what I'm saying is that as an organizer, as a
Yeah.
what next person, right? We have to do more than just kvetch. Everybody understand that
Yes.
what the Yiddish word
Y-
kvetch means
yes.
to complain,
Yes.
right?
Thank you. That we can agree on. I 100%.
So if we're going to do more, then we need to re-engage with the ACLU and say, hey, wait a second, you're doing a great job protecting the speech of those who are already powerful.
Hmm.
How about we protect the speech of those who are out of power?
Right. I think, and again, that's on us. That the onus is on us to be the advocates that we need to be. We cannot let the government be our advocate because they will not serve the people. So we have to do that. And that's sort of the end of what I wanted to say earlier is that we have to participate more in it. And I'm saying this, I was in a conversation on social media a couple of weeks ago, and the conversation was about um, uh, the relationship between black men and black women through the lens of social media and how it's been a trend lately to depict black men and black women at odds with each other and to talk about single black women who don't want to be bothered with black men because black men is this and this, and then there's black single black men who don't want to be bothered with black women and how everyone's going to go dead outside their race. And I was saying to them, I said, this is propaganda because as a black man, I know hundreds of black men in positive and loving relationships with black women. And so, where are their representation in the media? So, either we acquiesce to to the images that we are given, or we create our own. Same thing that happened with the Oscars, and there was all the Oscars are so white, and all only white actors are getting these Oscars. And I kept saying, why do we keep sitting at a table where we are not welcome? Why don't we create our own awards organization to reward black excellence, black actors, black directors, so that we don't have to worry about that because it's clear that we were not meant to be there. Sort of like what we talked about before the recording started. We don't belong there, so why don't we create our own space? Let's use the process for our faith in our favor. If speech is free, and I fight for free speech so that I can use it too. The moment you start toying with freedoms and rights, then that takes away our power, right? If we have this right, then we must protect it. And yes, that means other people can take advantage of it. People that are less positive can take advantage of it. But okay, so we should take advantage of it as well. Instead of sitting back and saying, "Oh, you offended me. Oh, you called me the N word. Oh, they should be censored." Why? Why can't we?
So
Go ahead.
I think Professor Franks agrees with you on that latter point, right? I think Professor Franks says that the sensitivity phrase of who gets to say what in public only serves the powerful who are annoyed
Exactly.
by it.
Exactly.
On the one hand. On the other hand, I think what you are saying is that maybe an addendum, a twist on Professor Frank's position is we are not going to cease defending reckless speech in public because we're going to lose that fight.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
We're there's nothing that's going to allow that's going to get our current Supreme Court or maybe a future Supreme Court to say that J.D. Vance propagating a lie that causes harm is going to needs to, that speech needs to be restricted.
Right.
So in in if we abandon that particular windmill to tilt at, let's do something more pragmatic and say fearless speech needs to be protected the same way reckless speech
I
is.
can get with that. I can get with that.
That we're going to not take on the twists and turns of how the First Amendment to the
Right.
Constitution has been
Because
implemented, but
we
in
won't
fact
win that one either.
we're just going to demand equitable application of
Exactly.
the protections.
Exactly. Case in point, the rally at Madison Square Garden. Everyone's, clutching their pearls out of all of the racist and misogynist things that were said at that rally. And well, he shouldn't have been allowed to say that. And I'm thinking he should have been allowed to say that. Let them say what they want to say, but how we respond is what matters. Are you still going to vote for that trash? Or are you going to
Well,
vote for something else? And so
and
that's how we respond, right?
I
That's
think
how we
this
put.
is so this is very important, Pastor Hughes, about the idea of finally saying the quiet part out loud.
Mm-hmm.
Because again, it goes back to our history of being a white supremacist, misogynist,
Exactly.
anti-indigenous people society that nobody would talk about in polite society, right?
Exactly.
President Andrew Jackson
Oh,
was, had no problem talking about slaughtering people
yes.
and was viewed as uncouth and therefore not a good representative of the Democratic
Exactly.
Party.
Exactly.
You know, uh, Abraham Lincoln, President Lincoln, for all of his virtues in the public sphere, also behind closed doors said that
Yeah.
African Americans were not equal.
Exactly. Exactly.
So bringing it out into the open is better for society because transparently identifying what terrible things are being said behind closed doors
Exactly.
is actually more helpful
It's actually more helpful.
because somebody who thinks it's okay to say what was said about Puerto Ricans on the public stage.
Oh my gosh. I mean, again, if that's how you feel, okay, I cannot control your feelings, but you don't say it out you don't say it out loud, man.
And
I
if
just
if one feels compelled or capable or free to say that out loud,
yes, that's
then
the
judge them
a core
appropriately.
exactly. If you feel bold enough to make those statements publicly, then you should catch hands. You should catch those hands that come with it. And I agree with that. And um, another thing that came up in conversation about this book actually was that she talked about the Me Too movement, but she talked about cancel culture in a way. And I always had this I was on the fence about cancel culture because I understand it for what I understand it for what people think it is, but I think a lot of what cancel culture is holding people accountable for saying the quiet parts out loud. If you're bold enough to say it, then you're bold enough to catch the backlash from it. That's freedom, right? So I don't want those freedoms to be curtailed, because then that blocks my freedom to respond. If I see something, if I read something, if I hear something that is offensive to me, then I should have the right to respond to that with my own speech. And so, no, you're not being canceled. You're being held accountable for what you said. Okay, it was 10 years ago.
Well,
Well, you shouldn't have said it.
but John McWhorter pointed out that people were actually being held accountable for things that they didn't say,
True,
right? So
but that's
somebody,
true.
that people are losing their jobs over the fact that they said that, Black Lives Matter, and also we care about all lives, and suddenly that person was being accused of being an all lives matter, anti-Black Lives Matter person because their framing was misinterpreted, but it didn't matter because in the overwhelming, punitive nature of public culture, and again, not necessarily a public person, but being punished
Being
for a
punished. Yeah.
non-public communication.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if you go down that road, which is my big critique of John McWhorter's book, is just you take it so far to the extreme that, that it nullifies the whole argument, right? It's just okay. You take it to its most logical conclusion, then what, right? So there's really nothing to argue about because now you're saying that, well, if this can happen, then that nullifies everything that's said previously. Which I mean, okay, but then what do we do with
Well,
that?
so we are still in a place where we're asking people to be held accountable for taking advantage of freedoms that we're not willing to enforce, right? We're not willing to
Yeah,
restrict. And
yeah.
and and yet there is no court of appeal in the court of public opinion.
No, there isn't, and that's just the way it is. But again, man, I keep saying this. There's a demographic of people in the country who have borne the brunt of that reality for generations. We've
For
borne it
sure.
for generations, and
I mean,
so
clearly, I mean, we have that, right, at this point, right, that
yeah,
Van Jones said with regard to our current presidential candidates that she has to be flawless while he can be lawless.
right, exactly. And so again, we have to deal with it, and we've had to deal with it, and so we kind of feel like I feel like that everybody has to deal with it. We should just deal with it, just like we've had to deal with it. you know, fight back when you can, where you can. But that's just reality. That's it's the same. Women make the same argument. Like you're not going to castrate every man on the street, are you? No. So there's going to be men who are going to try to take advantage of women. What can we do about it? Can we lock all the men in the prison? No, we can't. We can't do that. We cannot expect the government to police everybody and everything. It's not that's not the solution,
So
right?
this gets to, kind of our original question,
Yes,
right?
it does. Full circle.
Right, which is um, the difference between responding to harm and preventing harm.
Mm-hmm.
Because, of course, harm prevention is exactly this area of slippery slope of I'm uncomfortable, therefore I'm being harmed,
Right, right.
which is what you're talking about. But
Exactly.
but harm amelioration, there is real harm, and we are now taking steps to stop the real harm from continuing. So
Mm-hmm.
this is our final question, then I want to open up to our wonderful guests, right? Um, this is this question of interest convergence, which we
Mm-hmm.
had talked about a little bit.
Yeah.
Uh, so Derek Bell, famously, and was brought up in McWhorter and also in this book,
Mm-hmm.
talks at some length about, and we can look at it as a derivation of Malcolm X's original observation that if white people are going to participate in countering racism, and you're only we're only engaging white people on their self-interests, then we're not actually creating a less racist society. We're just creating less racism that white people are comfortable with. But as soon as we get into something that, is basically a pocketbook issue, as soon as white people feel that the competitive environment is threatened, whether it's equal access to businesses and loans or affirmative action, then white people say, oh, no, 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 that's too far. We got to be patient.
There you go. Be
Okay.
slow. Go slow. Slow it down.
And of course, Professor Franks points out the same issue with regard to women's issues, that Hugh Hefner was all for advancing women's rights in areas where he felt they were helpful for him, right?
Right. Of course.
Pro-choice, pro-birth control,
But then on
but
the flip side, he was the biggest pimp in America, right?
well, worse than that is he participated in revenge porn,
Oh yeah.
and
Awful,
basically
awful human
held
being.
held women hostage in
Yeah.
in the Playboy Mansion,
Yeah.
and
Kidnapping.
perpetuated a disempowering, as because of
Yeah.
course anything that threatened his power was not worthwhile. So
Exactly.
so at the heart of this is Nanette says, "Ha, biggest pimp in America." Yes. Well, we haven't even gotten to the whole Larry Flint issue, which we're not going to because it's too drastically extreme and out of bounds. So
Yeah.
my question on this is, Pastor Hughes and I have participated in a lot of organizing culture, and organizing culture starts with this idea, and Pastor Hughes and I are kind of a exhibit A on this. We're poster children for if we sit down and get to know one another, we begin to understand what each other's self-interests are,
Mm,
and therefore we begin to align our self-interest to a communal interest to do good together, much more so than we could do on our own.
hmm.
And it is only by learning each other's self interests that we can then find something that we can work on together. Now, this presumes the basic idea, and perhaps it's an idealistic idea, perhaps too idealistic, that if we get to know one another better, we will in fact find self interest in common. That I will see in sort of an enlightened self interest manner that even though I'm not African American, when my African American neighbors do better, I do better too.
Mm,
And
mm,
which is both contrary to Derek Bell's basic presumption and contrary to Malcolm X's basic presumption, because
mm,
it starts with the idea that if I get in relationship with my neighbors, I will see my interest align with them,
mm.
and that I'm not actually. It's not the sales pitch of do this for yourself. It's the understanding of broadening who is included in my definition of community and family.
Right. Right.
Um, so, are is this a lost path now? Because now people don't have the time to do that. People
Mm,
don't have the time to relationship build. People don't have the time to see each other as remotely in it together. People don't have the time to figure out how, your family living in Orchard Park and my family living in North Buffalo have all sorts of advantages. And it turns out
yeah.
that your African American background and my Jewish background brings with them all sorts of disadvantages. And they're
Mm,
totally different.
yeah.
And still, we have common cause.
But
But
it comes down to will and desire, right? Like we said before, you have to want to do that. Like you have to want to put yourself in the shoes of your neighbor. You have to want to be in community with people. And so that takes a lot of work and it takes a lot of effort. And I was talking with my group here at the church. Sometimes people are just tired. It takes a lot of work to do that. It takes a lot of work for me to carve out time out of my day to sit and have this conversation. I enjoy it because I want to do it, right? But the average person that walks around my office right now wouldn't dream of it. Not that they hate other people that don't look like them. It's just that they don't have the bandwidth to do that work. Does that
so
make sense?
it makes perfect sense because what we're saying is right now, and this is really at the heart of my feeling about this,
Mm,
is that we've structured society in such a way on purpose to
Yes.
make extracurricular community building into a luxury item.
Right.
Yes. So capitalism is
Yeah.
what's tiring us out. And that's a tangent we
Yes.
can't go down. 4-day work
It's
week.
true
Yes.
though.
Right.
It's
Nanette, you're
true.
absolutely right.
We're too
And
busy
and and
working.
and this is the thing. We've gone so far past that because we require people to do so much work and so much effort that there is zero time for them to devote to, the quote unquote soft skills,
Mm.
right?
Soft
There's
skills. Right.
there's what we used to call somewhat demeaningly women's work, but was still
Mm.
work, right?
Mm.
Women weren't compensated for creating a social life for their family. Women weren't compensated for uh, parenting. women weren't compensating for running a tight household.
Yeah.
However, all of those things need to be done. And when all of us are working, we're figure out, hopefully in a more egalitarian and equitable manner, how they get done without, and most of us can't afford to hire people to do that.
But like you said before, we have to start from an idea that we are equal, right? We have to start from a standpoint of the work that women traditionally, the work that women had done is work.
Yes.
And that's something that a lot of men struggle with, especially men of an older generation. They struggle with the fact that all of that women's work was flipping work, right? I mean, my wife is a PhD. My wife is brilliant. She's much smarter than I am. She's much more qualified for work than I am, but she can't get a job. So what does she do? She's a housewife and she's exhausted all the time because it's work. It's work cleaning. It's work. And so if we can come to an equitable mindset where we say the work that I do as the quote unquote breadwinner of my family is of equal value as the work that my wife does at home with the house and the children, then we can have a conversation. We can talk about that.
Oh, and Nanette points out there was an expectation that capitalism pay men a wage to support an entire family on,
That
but
that's
pay
true.
white men a
White
wage
men,
to
white
support an
men,
entire family then, right?
yes.
Because of course the white man who demanded being able to pay taxes as a marital couple was
Mm.
looking to qualify their
Oh,
wife's work at
exactly.
home as part of what he was paying for,
Right.
which allowed them to file jointly and drop his tax bracket down in
Hmm.
half.
There you go. It was
So
all
and
manipulative.
as we've talked about in from um, the whiteness of wealth, that was never a loophole that was accessible to African American couples, both of who worked, who got zero bonus from
Right,
filing jointly.
right,
The
right,
only people who got benefits from filing jointly were upper middle class white guys whose wives didn't work.
right. And they hired black women to do the work, domestic
Right.
workers,
And paid them crap.
and paid them crap. Exactly.
All right. On that note, I've given everyone the opportunity to unmute and turn on your video. We'd love to hear what our amazing supporters, and everyone here is a super supporter of our work. We invite anybody who is listening or watching from elsewhere to join us via Patreon or via opendoorjudaism.org and support Pastor Hughes and myself and Accomplices for Justice and all we're doing in the world. It's great to see you. Nanette, thank you for your comments in the chat. Tay, it's great to see you. And I know Barb and Chris and Allison are also here. So it's awesome to have you all with us. Any other thoughts? We threw a lot out there. And Barb, you made it back from Philly.
I'm not
And
able.
you have a Harris Walls camo hat, a highly sought after commodity in this world.
Yes.
Someone at a restaurant offered money for this hat.
Yeah, but you
Turned it
kept it
down.
anyway.
We turned it down.
I'm going to say because it's a collector's item now.
I can't turn on the video. You wouldn't let me.
Oh, I'm sorry. I will make sure. There we go.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
We used to have a response when people say, "Do you work?" I'm saying, "Do you mean do I work outside the home for salary?" No, I work at home for no salary.
Well, and we are just celebrating a little over 50 years since women in the United States of America were able to open their own bank accounts and
Yes.
get their own credit cards.
50
Yeah.
years, y'all.
Yeah, I remember that when I went to college. We couldn't.
Could get a credit card.
Well, when I was first married in the 60s. Nope.
Allison, what are you going to say?
We came here in 1970 from Africa, and I demonstrated on the steps of the M&T Bank because they would not allow me to have a credit card. It had to be in my husband's name.
Yeah.
So
Wow.
I'm part of that movement.
Yeah. Good.
I was shocked. Yes.
So So what do we think about this whole free speech question and whether or not, I mean, because I think the crux of Professor Frank's perspective on this is really that
We're thinking that.
we ought to be lauding the the free speech of those who challenge the system, which we have done a terrible job of doing in the past, and we ought to be curtailing speech that does real damage. You know, that revenge porn, for example, and stalking and all these other forms of speech do real and serious damage, especially to women and people who are on the outs of society. And and Pastor Hughes pushed back and came and said that attempting to restrict damaging, harmful speech is a slippery slope. That it's likely only to enhance the speech of the powerful anyway. That we can't actually uh, we don't have a system that would allow us to trust anyone to be the arbiter of such things. So instead, we should err on the side of giving the same protection of speech to everybody that
To
is now
everybody.
given to the reckless speakers.
Right. And then use the speech, use the power that we have, which we often don't. We have that power. We don't use it. And
I
that's
was
what happens.
talking with, I recently signed up with Literacy Buffalo Niagara. So I'm a literacy volunteer. And the student that they assigned me is a Buddhist monk out in Grand Island from Thailand. And he and I were talking. He was asking me about the first thing he said to me was, "I like Obama." I was like, okay, whatever. But he was asking me just last week what I thought about the election and what I thought about Trump. And I was explaining to him that as a Black person, well, just as a spiritual person, I come from the belief that all things have value. Even what appears to be crummy and bad, and the value, as crappy as Trump was, the value of him having been president for 4 years is that he brought to the surface all that was unsaid, and it being out in the, not just him, but all the people that he gave license to, and it being out in the open now allowed us to deal with it in the open.
Mm,
So
mm.
there was value to it. So given that argument, I'm leaning towards Pastor Hughes.
That more speech allows us to better see who people really are, right? When a
Yeah,
la Maya Angelou, when people tell them tell them who
Believe
you
them.
are, who they are, believe them.
believe
Yeah, I
me.
mean, I look at I look at the Constitution, I look at the article. All of these documents are tools, right? And a hammer by itself is not a danger to anybody. It becomes dangerous in the hands in someone's hands. If you want to use a hammer as a tool to build a house, you can build a house. If you want to use a hammer as a tool to take someone's life, you can take someone's life. It's not the hammer, right? Just because a murderer is a serial killer and he's using a hammer, do we then curtail the sale of hammers? No. It's not the hammer's fault. It's the people who hold the hammer. So it's about, do we protect free speech? Yes, I think we should protect free speech, but let's deal with the real problem. The real problem is the people who are using the free speech in a negative way. And we have to combat that with our own way, a positive way. We can both use free speech for our goals. I mean, that's just how I feel. I know it gets shaky, but that's how I feel.
Well, but I think what's really important about this is, and this is something Pastor Hughes and Annette, that the two of you have taught me a lot about, which is that I listen to and read a lot of in the legal sphere, right? Amicus is one of my favorite podcasts. It's Dahlia Lithwick who's talking about the Supreme Court. There's another podcast called Lawfare, which is really about how law is used positively and negatively in
Mm,
the world. And my reaction to something on lawfare comes directly from the two of you, which is at some point they said in lawfare that the only recourse for judges who find um, the situation to be untenable is to quit, that they
Hmm.
can't, uh, and
Wow.
and this is directly in contravention to the history of appeals court judges and lower court judges in this country finding problems with what's coming out of the Supreme Court and actually sort of judging upwards
Hmm.
and
Mm.
saying, no, we're not going to abide by an unjust opinion from the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court is fallible,
Mm.
and that we can protest from our position.
Mm.
And I think this is, you know, as admittedly a white guy, you may have noticed, uh, there is something from a white educated background that says we're going to trust the system. And what both of you have continued to point out is you can't trust a system that's killing us.
Mm.
If it's an inherently unfair system, we have to maybe we're working within the system, but we don't have to use the rules of the system all the time to change the system because sometimes the rules themselves are incredibly unjust.
Right.
Mm.
Right.
Yes, Allison.
I really appreciate what Wiley said. It gave me a whole new view of how to respond or not respond to hate speech. Now, Wiley, how would you, when you're talking about the hammer doesn't kill the people we do. What about guns? It
Same
isn't.
thing.
That's what I was thinking too.
Same thing. A gun is a tool. I've used a gun in my careers in the military. I used a gun when I was young, living in the country with my grandparents. We used that weapon to protect ourselves. We used that weapon to feed ourselves. We never shot anybody. We shot at people, but they were harming us, right? I lived in the rural area of Georgia, and we had neighbors on either side of my grandparents that were white supremacists, and they would poison our animals. They would,
Wow.
they would poison my pets. They
Ooh,
would poison our crops. You know, they would put poison in the ground. And they would sometimes throw rocks in our. I grew up with my grandparents when I was younger. They would throw rocks in our home, in through the window. And so the guns protected us. All right. We didn't kill anybody. I was a child. I knew how to shoot a rifle by the time I was 12. Right. So I can't stand here and say that guns are dangerous, but people are dangerous. And I know I know what dangerous people do with guns. And so
Mhm.
the problem for me is not guns, it's people. Now, if you really want to talk about gun violence, let's talk about regulating certain individuals' ability to get hold of a weapon.
yeah.
It's not right that a 12-year-old black kid in the hood can get access to a gun easier than he can get access to fresh produce. That's a
Mm.
problem, but it's not the gun's fault, right? It's the bigger problem there. And so I'm always an advocate for, let's talk about the people who are getting these guns. That boy who shot up the tops back a couple of years ago, right?
Yeah,
That should not have happened. That should not have happened. He should not have had access to that weapon, more or less take that weapon across the state. That should not have happened. So many things failed in that situation, right? And so, that's just the way, that's how I see it.
So regulating access
hey,
to firearms may be the way we regulate access to automobiles,
Maybe.
right?
I mean,
Because
we do regulate access to automobiles, right?
right. I mean, I have to buy insurance in order to drive a
Right.
car legally. Why
Right.
shouldn't I have to buy insurance if I to own a gun legally?
Right. Right. And certain kids are not allowed to buy cars. They're not allowed to drive cars, right? Because they're too young. I agree with that,
Right.
right?
Meaning a gun license requires guns require a license.
They require a license. They require
And
registration, right? Just like a car has registration.
if I want to buy an assault rifle, it's like getting a truck
It's
license.
like getting a truck license. You got to go through something extra.
Right.
Go to military, get shot at, go to war,
Well,
then
I
come
mean,
back talk about assault rifle.
but spend time learning how to use it responsibly,
Exactly.
right? Because a
Exactly.
truck is a much more dangerous item
It is.
than
Yeah.
a sedan, and
Right. But
therefore
at the same,
I need to know how to use it better.
that's right. You need to be more familiar with the weapon, right? Be more familiar with the gun, with the truck. Same thing. Down across the board, across the board.
Look at that. We solved a problem already today.
Yes,
Barb,
we
yes.
did.
Okay. I'm a little overtired, but back to, I've been up since 4 o'clock this morning
Ooh.
to get home here. Back to, freedom of speech. I really do, I feel very much like Pastor Hughes and Nanette, and I think it is better to know what's out there. And I feel it is my responsibility to respond to that.
Mm.
And I am very guilty of just going, oh my God, those people are just crazy, and leaving it at that. And we need to go beyond that, but I don't know how to go beyond
Mm.
that.
Well,
I think
we're
that
we're doing that here,
that was
and that
what
is
I would like to work
we're building the community here that will allow us to have the voice to go beyond that. So to go beyond so bring to us your objections, and then we bring them together to somebody else, right?
Mm.
We need to use the mechanisms that are already there. Our elected officials, we need to change the ACLU. We need to actually advocate for the issues that we care about with the
Yeah,
people who are doing something about it.
yeah. I mean,
Mm.
again, that's a David and Goliath kind of situation. But yeah, I mean, you know, gosh, the people have the power, man. We have so much power. Because if we didn't have power, they wouldn't be working overtime to curtail our power. They wouldn't be stopping us from voting. They wouldn't be inundating us with crap on social media so that we don't have the bandwidth to even think about issues that matter. And I mean, that's a thing, right? We're all weary. Why are we weary? What are we weary about? The situation is still the same, and yet we're all exhausted because we've just been inundated. And there are still people right now who have no idea what they're voting for. They have no idea who these people are.
And
And,
and
you
on
know,
that, Pastor Hughes, I want to bring us to a close with one quick
oh,
vignette.
sorry, I said
That's
the bad
okay.
thing.
No, it's okay.
Can of worms, sorry.
No. Exactly on this. You didn't say anything bad. You say you provided a lead into the next story, which is what we can do is what we do in our everyday lives and the conversations we have. So my mother, God bless her, lives in an apartment building on the Upper West Side of New York, and has lived in the same building since 1981. So she knows everybody in the building. She knows the doormen. She has adopted the doormen. She feeds them on holidays. When they're working and everybody else is celebrating, my mother sends food, to them. So Patrick, who's one of the doormen, is a great guy, and my mother wanted to engage him on the content of the rally at Madison Square Garden on Sunday night, because Patrick is of Puerto Rican descent,
Mm,
and Patrick hadn't heard anything.
mm.
And my mother had the conversation with Patrick and said,
Oh,
"Look it up."
I gotta go.
And her next conversation with him was, I'm going to go out and vote for Kamala now. And my mother's response was, and make sure your wife and your kids and your parents do too.
Wow.
And
Wow.
and this is how change happens. Relationships at a time. My mother's relationship with Patrick goes back years. Patrick was a doorman there when I was living there
Wow.
in the late 80s and early 90s. He's been there that long. His kids, he became a father as I knew him. So I know his kids through photos who are now adults. You know,
Wow.
so we have relationships. Let's not let them go. Let's
Right.
utilize them. Let's use the
Right.
trust that we've built to, in fact, say, hey, wait a second. Did you see that? That's not
Mm.
okay.
That's right. See something, say something, right?
That's right. But not see something, say something to the government. See something, say something to your
To
neighbors.
your
To each other.
neighbor. Yes.
To each other.
So, on that, I hope, God willing, that all of us will see something and say something and make a difference in the next 6 days that will hopefully make sure that we still have a democracy in 7 days. and that will hopefully make sure that whatever happens in the next 6 days leads to all of us still being able to live and work together and pray together and come together for transformative conversations that lead to great actions. Thank you all so much for your support, for being here. It is a pleasure and a blessing, and I look forward to more time like this together soon. Uh,
Thank you.
You.
Thank you.